Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. There might be a few joining later, but in the interest of being on time, we'll get started. So I am Liz Hess. I'm the Regional Director of Emergency Management for WellSpan Health. That's my daytime job. My fun thing that I do is the KEMA Mentorship Committee Chair. So with that, we host these KEMA coffee breaks. So that's what this is. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you've been to one before, welcome back. Did I see any of the leaders from KEMA on? Did we want to do a brief KEMA update?
Good morning, Liz. Bud Mertz here.
Good morning. Did you have anything you wanted to share? Or good afternoon, I should say.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I didn't have anything prepared, but I do want to thank you for your continued initiative with our coffee breaks. I think that they're wonderful. Continuing the outreach to the KEMA membership, throughout the years in between all of our larger events. Tonight, KEMA will be hosting its annual spring meeting. We held a spring meeting, I think it was 2 years ago, that during the COVID pandemic, so that we could keep in touch with our membership and let them know that we are continuing working on their behalf to fulfill our mission. And it was well received. And so tonight at 6 o'clock, for the KEMA members that are on, or the prospective KEMA members that are on, that we will be holding that spring meeting again. And just a way to keep in touch with our full membership. And of course, during the meeting tonight, we'll be briefing our October conference that we're having, and we'll give a brief as far as the dates, the times, and maybe some of the speakers, although we haven't finalized that list yet. But it looks to be a great conference for us. This year, we're in partnership with the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, so it's that cooperation is going well, and we look forward to having a successful conference as well. But thank you again, and I thank your guest speakers today for being there as well.
Wonderful, thank you. That was our president of KEMA, for those of you who don't know, so thanks for that update. Okay, so I'm going to get started by introducing our speakers. I'll let you each kind of introduce yourself because you know yourselves the best. So we have Joseph Gilletta, sorry. He's the Director of Emergency Management at New Jersey Department of Health and Human Services. So Joe, if you could do a brief introduction of your background.
Yeah, good afternoon. I want to thank KEMA and of course Liz for inviting us for this coffee break. Thank you all for joining. I work for the New Jersey Department of Human Services, and my role is to serve as the state's mass care coordinator during a disaster.
Great, thank you, Joe. And Tim Cooper.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Cooper. I'm the Director of the Office of Preparedness for Delaware Public Health. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I also want to thank Liz and thank the association for the invite. We're happy to share information, some lessons learned today, and hopefully some of the jurisdictions can benefit from some of the things that we've learned. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, Joe, we're going to start with your presentation. So I have that here and we'll share that in just a moment. All right, we should be good to go.
Okay, great. So thank you again. This presentation is going to focus on some of the initiatives we're moving forward in New Jersey by engaging the disability and access and functional needs community in emergency planning and mass care operations. That's my contact number on the bottom of the slide there. By all means, if you have any questions, just feel free to contact me and I'll always go out of my way for anyone involved in this process because we really want to help the most vulnerable populations in our state. So you could go on to the next slide. In New Jersey, we work in coordination with the state police. The state police coordinates emergency management in New Jersey. And as such, Colonel Pat Callahan, he serves as the state director of emergency management. And he's responsible for crafting the state's emergency operations plan. And as most of you know, it's an all hazards plan that really covers all phases of emergency management, preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. And we try to adhere to that whole community approach. So as you know, the state emergency operation plan is a pretty detailed document, but it's broken up into 15 distinct sections, and you can go on to the next slide. These are the 15 emergency support functions that Colonel Callahan asks various state departments to craft their plan. As you can see, our role for the New Jersey Department of Human Services is to craft a plan that deals with mass care and emergency assistance. Each state department generally is the lead for various emergency support functions, but we work in coordination with the colonel and our troopers to make sure when we submit our state's mass care plan, it's been reviewed by all partners, so we have a pretty viable operation if need be in the event of a disaster. So like I said, we coordinate mass care, and generally that entails sheltering, feeding, distribution of emergency supplies, and family reunification. Some of the other plans we have to craft that the colonel has to review are a family assistance center plan, our state's emergency repatriation plan, disaster housing, mass feeding, and of course, disability access and functional needs. We have an annex to our mass care plan, and the DAFN plan is critical, and we try to convey that to our county partners that we work with, in addition to the local emergency managers that we work with as well. This formula down the bottom is something I always try to use. It's very critical when you talk about being an emergency planner or an emergency management coordinator. It's the 4 C's plus the 4 P's equal R, or relationships. And the 4 C's are taken out of the VOAD motto, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. That's communication, collaboration, coordination, and cooperation. And you add the 4 P's, partnerships, planning, practice, and preparedness, and you get relationships. When you do those 4 C's and the 4 P's, you're building relationships. And clearly, with mass care, don't just think of it as our department being the sole party to deal with a mass care operation. It's many different partners, not so much on the state side, but also from the non-governmental organization side, faith-based groups, community organizations. We rely on so many to help us with our mass care efforts when we activate during a disaster. So we have a pretty big logistical footprint. We kind of pre-staged, mass care resources throughout our state. We're not as big a state as Pennsylvania, of course, but we try to strategically place these things, these trailers that have a lot of stuff in it to set up a shelter. We have shower trailers that we could deploy where needed across the state, and a number of different durable medical equipment supplies, whether it's walkers, canes, wheelchairs, Hoyer lifts, everything we have in place that we can deploy to our counties if needed during a disaster operation. So again, we're focusing on that whole community approach. New Jersey, if you look at the Census Bureau, you could check demographics and see what it entails. Over 60 million have a disability. In New Jersey alone, we have 9 million people, and of that, over 10% have a disability. Our New Jersey Stakeholder Preparedness Report and the Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment report, we identified gaps with our plans that focus on disability and access and functional needs. So knowing that we have this report, we try to correct those and address those gaps and weaknesses that we identified. Our New Jersey Sheltering Task Force has a DAFN subcommittee that focuses on some of these challenges and gaps that we've recognized. And we have a group called NJ Gained That's Group for Access and Integration Needs in Emergencies and Disasters. That consists of many leaders from the disability and access and functional needs community that consistently meets and talks about different topics where we can focus on helping the most vulnerable populations in our state. So the plan pretty much is to train the disability access and functional needs community in preparedness activities, to train our OEM, emergency management coordinators, in how to engage and work with the DAFN community to firm up your mass care operation plans. And lastly, to bring in those resources and do exercises to test our plans to make sure that they're accurate and that they're viable and that we have all the partners we need to function in a disaster. So as I said, training and exercise is the key. If you have a plan in place, you have to take it off the shelf. You have to exercise it. I don't care if it's a simple tabletop where you sit around a table and you talk about it. That's the only way you're going to identify gaps and weaknesses, or to bring in an additional partner to help you. We were very fortunate to be awarded a Regional Catastrophic Preparedness Grant Program award. And I can't thank our mass care colleagues in Pennsylvania, Brighton Lewis and Christine Heiser, enough. Thanks to their support that they gave to us, we were awarded that. In addition, the emergency management coordinator up in Allentown, Lee Lawback, and Mary Ellen Shields from the health department in Allentown gave us a letter of support as well. And I'm sure, thanks to their support to this grant, we were awarded it. And we're looking to work regionally with our partners, not only within the state, but within Region 3 as well, and our partners in Pennsylvania, to develop this project we're working on with engaging the disability access functional needs community in basic disaster preparedness. We developed a curriculum where we're starting to deliver now that talks about disaster preparedness for those with disabilities and access and functional needs. But more importantly, we developed this overnight sheltering exercise that we engage the OEM coordinators, the emergency management coordinators, as well as the disability access and functional needs community. So it's been very successful that we're doing this, and we're looking to expand it up to our partners in Pennsylvania as well. I proposed a submission for a presentation at the next KEMA conference in Altoona. I hope it's going to be accepted, and I'm looking forward to meeting most of you if you go to that conference, because it's always a great way to network with one another. So the key thing is to conduct practical exercise and test the plans, but actually do these overnight sheltering exercises with the disability and access and functional needs community. Next one. So we're trying to engage many different partners in this. We're working with our county offices of emergency management and our county access and functional needs coordinators. They're the key to make this happen for us. We also have county core advisory groups that have been stood up throughout our state, working with the disability integration advisor from our FEMA Region 2 colleagues. We're trying to build up those groups to really make them more vibrant and engage more of the local emergency planning committees and OEM coordinators. We're working with our community emergency response teams and our medical reserve corps teams in doing different trainings to assist at a shelter with helping those with disabilities and access and functional needs when they arrive. Normally, they're probably not going to arrive with their personal care assistant. So we're trying to give a little higher level of care by training our MRC teams and some of our other groups that help us out when we activate in a disaster in this state. Register Ready is our registration database for those with disabilities to register at. It's registerreadynj.gov, and people can go on that have a disability access or functional needs and register. So this way the local emergency manager will know where they're located and how to plan accordingly if needed. Again, we have a New Jersey Functional Assessment Service Team, NJ FAST. It was developed really in coordination with our Pennsylvania partners that helped us with the training. And we now have a team in place in New Jersey. NJ Gained is helping us with a lot of different things we're doing and promoting these projects. And the bottom line is we're just trying to build resiliency among our communities. So here are some of the things we have. We developed a lot of different paperwork, documents, and training. We're promoting this throughout the state with mass care operations and disability and access and functional needs training. We're working with our statewide independent living councils to deliver the overnight sheltering. And we're looking to expand this training to our partners next door in Pennsylvania, as well as Delaware and other states in the region, because we think it's a very good model to help out with engaging those communities that we try to help the most vulnerable. We've been working with the KEMA. We can't thank KEMA enough for allowing us to do these presentations along with your team, as well as NJEPA, that's the New Jersey Emergency Preparedness Association Conference. We just had our conference just last week in Atlantic City, had a big turnout for that. So we're just trying to promote this project and engage as many as we can in helping the most vulnerable in our state. And the Abilities Expo is something we just did early in May. That's yearly. It happens in our area by New York, and a lot of people turned out for that. And we were giving out a lot of preparedness materials to the disabilities community. Next one. So bottom line is we're trying to review and improve our plans the best we can, trying to bring on more partners to help us with our disability and access and functional needs operations. We're delivering the disaster preparedness training specifically earmarked for those with disabilities and access and functional needs. We'll be giving out additional materials to them to help them put together their go kits in the event of a disaster. And this mass care and disability training courses we developed, we're promoting that throughout the state as well, and looking forward to promote it with our regional partners in Pennsylvania and elsewhere as a model to help you with your planning efforts to help the most vulnerable and pretty much build resiliency throughout your area. So thank you so much. You go to the next slide. I think it gives my contact information. Again, there's my cell number. You see my email as well. Please feel free to email me or phone call me, whatever you need. I can't thank Liz and the team enough from KEMA for allowing me to be here for this coffee break. I hope it was informative, but please give me a call if you have any questions. Thank you, Liz.
Wonderful, Joe. Thank you. Great presentation. Does anyone have any questions right now? Okay, well, you can always put them in the chat or save them for the end. I love to see the collaboration between interstates. That's awesome, and I hope we can continue to do that. And however KEMA can support that mission, you can always reach out to us. So Tim, I will turn it over to you now. Let me just get the screen going.
Okay, thank you, Liz. And once again, I just want to thank you, thank the association, and thanks, Joe, for a great presentation. I feel like we definitely could collaborate more between New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania help us get our FAST team started as well. Christine Heiser and her group. So that's great to hear. Okay, so one of the things I just want to say before we start is, we're not at the end of this process by any means. We're still getting into making our plans and our response and our exercises more bringing children as a primary role in our whole community planning. So we're not saying that we got everything finished. But we do have some lessons, I think, that others can learn. And I think that, we have some great resources that we can share with you, no matter where you are in your jurisdiction for your planning process with children in disaster. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk about today is our background, how I got started in emergency management, and then how our agency got started with children in disaster. We are going to share some guidance documents. A lot of them are clickable resources within the presentation, and you can go on and look at those various resources. Then we're going to get into very specific things that we did to improve our response capability with children in disaster. And then hopefully at the end, we're going to answer questions if you have questions. Next slide, please. So I've been in emergency management now for 15 years. Or 17 years. I've been at the state, the local, and regional level in 2 different states, in Maryland and Delaware. I think what really got us started was we went to a presentation at IEM, which is the International Association of Emergency Managers, and we joined their Children in Disaster Caucus, which really started our pathway to looking at, how we should be focused on children. And then most importantly, this is my daughter. She's Moulage. No kid would have a smile that big if that was really a burn injury. So, I've been a parent and an advocate for children for a long time now. Next slide, please. So in broad terms, we're going to talk about why children are so unique and why they need special planning in a disaster, especially. We're going to talk about specific things that Delaware was able to do. And then, as I mentioned, share just some resources that are available to you free. If I was able to reach out to all of you and have you hold your hands up high, how many of you had a disaster kit? How many of you are prepared? I hope that it's really high, because this is a group of disaster preparedness officials. But that the public is not really that prepared, and surveys bear this out. But people are also not very confident in their ability for their local officials to take care of the needs of children in disaster. And I would say with COVID-19, expectations are even higher of government. And then the second quote is really more disturbing. 41% of people do not know where their secondary location is for their children, whether they're being evacuated from a nursing, or not a nursing home, I'm sorry, a daycare center or a school. And that's really sad. This comes to you from the National Center for Disaster Preparedness at Columbia University. We'll talk a little bit about them more. Next slide, please. One of the things that really brought to light a lot of the gaps in preparedness was really Katrina and the National Commission on Children in Disasters. There's a great quote from this paper, and it really lists out the recommendations that we should enact as a nation regarding children in disaster. Some of them have been implemented, some of them have not thus far, but because of the unique needs of children, they must be thoroughly planned into our planning process and must be made a priority. We'll talk about specifically what the population of children in Delaware, but it's roughly about 25%, depending on where you are nationally. So in a population of 1 million people, that could be as many as 200,000 kids. Next slide, please. I know that last month you had a meeting on preparedness, and you went over a lot of planning in your KEMA coffee break. So the CPG 101, which is really FEMA's guide to how to do planning, really now addresses the needs of children. So this was just updated in September with a lot of great checklists and resources from children. Some of these will sound familiar. It's a lot of the things that Joe went over, but preparedness, evacuation operations, shelter operations. There's things that you probably should have in a shelter if you're going to have kids. And then messaging to kids, which is really focused on messaging to parents and then messaging to organizations that serve children. Next slide, please. So why are children so unique? So some of that we already mentioned. First of all, children are away from their parents a majority of the time. So they're at a school for 8 hours or they're at a daycare, which means that somebody else is responsible for the emergency planning for those children while they're under their care. So it's important to make sure that not only do you have plans for how you would address children, but make sure the evacuation, the shelter in place plans are good for those facilities that house your children or house children in the community. Something that we went through about 20 years ago in EMS, children are not little adults. You know, they're not just a smaller version of adults. Their processes are very different, their development. They may not understand commands or instructions from emergency management. They have to be chaperoned when you're talking about small children. As I mentioned, they're often not with parents, but they're with caregivers. So they may not be as familiar as they should, like a parent would. And then just their physical makeup makes them more susceptible to burns because their body surface area and inhalation injuries. One of the great resources for children in disaster is the KEMA workshop, which is integrating the needs of children. So those are children as a population in general. Then you also take into the fact that 1 out of every 5 children may have a special healthcare need. So those children, children in general, don't really adapt to change. For those that are parents, you know, when that clock is set back or set forward, sometimes that's just enough to throw your kid right out of kilter. Children in disaster, and especially children with special healthcare needs, really don't adjust to change well. So changing their location, having them shelter in place, having them wear a mask, you know, those are all things that may cause some disruption for children. So those are the kind of things that you need to think about in your different plans. Next slide, please. So I sort of mentioned this, we're about 1 million people. 20%, our last census is about as far as children. And then it breaks it down between adults and children. And actually, I don't know what this says about Delaware, but we're actually decreasing from 2010 to 2020. And I'm sure these statistics are available for your jurisdictions in Pennsylvania as a state and then your respective jurisdictions. But it just gives you some idea of the population. Next slide, please. So how did we get started? Really, we got started much like Joe talked about with the access and functional needs planning. We had a group that we put together, and then we felt like we still weren't addressing the needs of children. So we looked at this pediatric resource from the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's really an older resource, but it really does have some great checklists and suggestions in shelters and what you should have. Of course, we adopted the CMIS language, which is communications, maintaining health, support, and transportation, which are all things that you need to think about when you take care of access and functional needs folks or people at risk. We created something called a Functional Information and Support Center, or FISC. This is a group of state agencies that serve vulnerable populations and community organizations like Autism Delaware and University of Delaware Center for Disability Studies. And those groups will provide information and some resources if asked upon from emergency management at all of our different functions, and it runs through the State Health Operations Center. We mentioned our functional assessment support team. This is a group that we have been putting together for years. And, you know, we had it about 85 to 90% completed. We went through the training. We were still looking at identifying staff that could perform this. And, you know, we had mass vaccine pods with the COVID-19 vaccination, and we just pushed it out. And we really focused on providing support for people with mobility issues and English as a second language. But we trained our volunteers. We have a medical reserve group. It's called Respond DE. And we really did just-in-time training and training online, and it was really helpful. So that's really how we got started with children. It was a branch off of our access and functional needs planning work. Next slide, please. These are some of the plans that we looked at, and I know that Joe had mentioned some of the similar plans that we have. Sheltering, mass care, obviously, but our Family Assistance Center, we really looked at, you know, what missions we needed to complete and how our intersection with children would take place. And in the FEMA training, it really does recommend looking at the lifelines, looking at the missions that you need to complete, and then looking at what organizations need to be represented to provide that support to children, whether it's mental health, whether it's social services, whether it's medical support. Next slide, please. We've been doing outreach for kids-centric events, I would say, for many years. We created this in partnership with Quick Series, preparing children for disasters, and we've given them out to lots of partners. We did reestablish our disaster committee for children in disaster, and it took a few false starts to get that up and running. So we worked with our contractor, Delta Development, to bring that into focus, so we could bring partners from the outside to look at, you know, where we had gaps and just bring our partners together. Next slide, please. And we came up with a couple workshops, and now we have an active group that we're working with. We work with the Department for Children, Youth, and their families. We have a very strong partnership with Delaware Emergency Management Agency and their school safety program. We've been working with the Department of Education, some of our county emergency managers, and county public safety agencies. Of course, from public health, we have our EMSC group, EMS for Children, if those of you don't know that acronym, and of course, our preparedness folks. And then because of the reunification work that's ongoing and the Family Assistance Center, we brought our acute hospitals as part of our Children in Disaster group, and that's been widely successful. We have AI DuPont for Children, which many of you may have heard of, but also our Trauma Center for Adults and our local and community hospitals are part of this group. Next slide, please. Thanks. So some of the identification of projects, we looked at, you know, just pushing out more preparedness information to both parents and child organizations. Some of the groups that or gaps that we identified as a group, we prioritized which ones we would focus on first. One of them was a reunification plan. We had a couple mentions of it in our Family Assistance Center plan, but we realized that we probably needed a whole separate reunification plan. So we've done that. We also wanted to identify all the training that was available to emergency planners, and we provided that to our partners in the state. Next slide, please. We looked at, we've always had mental health for adults under response and recovery. We're adding mental health support for children in our shelters, and whether that means giving our mental health folks additional training in how to take care of children, and then also bringing in counselors for children when we have a shelter event. But we've created a great partnership with DEMA and Youth and Family Services. We've also provided technical assistance to the Department of Youth and Family Services, not only so they could take care of the 8,000 children that may come, that already are part of their existing infrastructure that they need to take care of on a daily basis, whether it's children that are in foster care or children that are actually at their facilities, and then any children that they may be asked to take care of during a disaster. We upgraded all of our AFN equipment and shelter equipment to make sure that we included equipment for children. And then we also created diversion kits, which really are activity kits, and they'll be used for all the plans that you saw for mass care, for repatriation center, and we have different kits, different materials for each age group, and that was based on the recommendation of our child partners. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the importance of planning for children with disaster, or children in disaster. I mentioned some of the accomplishments, and then a lot of the resources that are available for this work. And as I said, we're really just beginning to make progress in this area, but I feel like even with the lessons that we've learned so far, hopefully, no matter where you are in your process, you can utilize some of these lessons that we've already learned. And next slide, please. And I think these are just some of the resources that we used, and some of the resources available if you want to do this in your own jurisdiction. And next slide, please. And these are just some of the references that we used. And I am very happy to answer any questions. And I'm so sorry, Liz, I did not put my contact information on there, but you know, you can do that when you send it out. I'm happy to answer questions. If those are shy on the call today, we're happy to answer that later as well. I want to, oh, you know what? I also want to thank my staff that helped put this presentation together, but also that work very hard to make sure that we have what we need for both access and functional needs, and for children in our communities.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, just for everyone's awareness, I will share both of these presentations and both of their contact information, just in case you weren't able to grab that. So any questions? We'll start with that. You can go off mute or put them in the chat. All right, I'll ask a more targeted question. Does anyone on the call have experience either currently or in the past with Pennsylvania's FAST team? Since it seems like both of these states got some pointers from Pennsylvania. Worth a chance, worth a shot, right? So Tim, can you speak a little bit how Delaware got started with some of the children's in disaster workshops and who you brought to the table to get started?
Absolutely. So I think it was a combination of things. I think that, you know, we had some staff in our office that were really working on access and functional needs, and we started looking at children in disaster. So we did the really simple things. We added our EMSC folks to our AFN group. So that's a planning group that we have. And then I think it was really children in disaster was one of the topics at IAEM, which is International Association of Emergency Managers. And it was the book that Lori Peek wrote, which is The Children of Katrina. And it was really based on, you follow children through this disaster and you look at all their different events they had in their life and how they fare after the disaster. So that really got us thinking about, and then we looked at, partnering with Youth and Family Services, and they've just been great. Everyone says the kids department. So, but they've just been great. They've been really great partners, and their deputy secretary now co-chairs our Children in Disaster group. So I think it was a combination of all those things that started us looking at, how we could improve some of our plans for children.
Great, thank you. Joe, a question for you. So Rick Christ put one in the chat. What are some of the partner agencies that are essential to success within the AFN community?
We use a variety of partners, starting with our own department. We have our Division of Developmental Disabilities, our Division of Disability Services, Division of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired, starting with them, but then reaching out across the sector, across our state agencies as well, that support those with disability and access and functional needs. We're fortunate that working with the state police, we have a state DAFN liaison that we work with consistently. And there's also ombudsman's offices from the governor's office itself that are a part of some of our teams as well. So we have a lot of good relationships that we've developed and fostered throughout the time working with this project, and we're hoping to expand it. So it runs across the spectrum of state agencies, nonprofit, non-governmental, community-based, faith-based. Anyone with a focus on helping the most vulnerable in our state, we are trying to partner with to promote our project. So it's been helpful for us with these groups like NJ Gained and the core advisory groups we have in the state, and of course the New Jersey FAST team that really helps us to build the relationships to make this work in our state and our planning efforts. Thank you, Rick.
Great. Jim Wilson, you had a great question. The new infrastructure bill has grants available for smart cities development. How might smart city technology be put into use in EM with vulnerable populations? I'm going to open that up to the group if anyone has some insight into that.
So I'm not familiar with that grant, but I know that we have an occupational therapist that has been embedded in our office for AFN work that we did under COVID. So she's been embedded from ASTO, which is the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials. So she's been with us about a year. And whenever we go out to a site, she's always looking at, wheelchair ramps and how accessible things are for vulnerable populations. So I'm sure that there's lots of good guidance that you can get. I don't know, specifically about that grant, but I think that's what you would focus on is, making the buildings more accessible for people. And then the buildings that you're going to use, whether it's schools or community buildings, as disaster, wherever you set up your recovery centers, your repatriation centers, those should also have, those kind of access needs.
Definitely. I think also along with that, just looking at technology, innovation, the Register Ready that Joe, you talked about for New Jersey, most states have some variation of that where you can register. I'm assuming that there could be innovation coming out of this grant since there might not be some money available that could expand that and make it more accessible to more people. Maybe make it a little bit more user-friendly for the emergency management team. Anyone have something like that in their region that they're familiar with and want to speak to? Based on the time of day, I'm gonna assume that a lot of you are traveling and listening in or multitasking, which I'm certainly guilty of, so no harm there. All right. Well, Tim or Joe, any closing thoughts? We don't need to drag it out if people are busy.
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to talk to you folks, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and Liz will have our contact information. But it was good to hear Joe's presentation and know that, you know, we've really been doing a lot of the same things, and hopefully Joe and our teams can collaborate a little bit more now too.
Yeah, and I'll echo Tim's sentiments. We really appreciate the fact of KEMA allowing us to be on this coffee break, as well as Liz for putting this together. I look forward to working with our Pennsylvania colleagues and others from Region 3 to promote this effort. And I hope to see most of you at the Altoona conference if our presentation for proposal is accepted, because it's a win-win for all of us to help the most vulnerable. So thank you, Liz, and thank you, KEMA, for allowing us to be.
Yeah, great. Thank you both so much. That is definitely the essence of KEMA, getting us all together and talking about what's working, what isn't working, and also sharing resources. I mean, if Tim's doing it in Delaware, maybe we can borrow it and not start from scratch. So glad to help in any way with that. All right, well, we'll end here. I will share the presentations and their contact information shortly. Thank you all for your time and have a wonderful evening.